The German shepherd froze on the trail. His ears twitched, his nose lifted to the breeze, and a low growl rolled out of his chest. It wasn't the sound of a squirrel or the rustle of deer. This was different, sharper, sadder, like a whisper that didn't belong in the forest. David Miller stopped walking and looked down at the dog at his side. "Rex, what is it, boy?" Rex didn't answer, of course. He simply stared into the thickness of Blackwood Forest, muscles tense, tail stiff. David had lived on the edge of these woods for years and had seen his dog alert to coyotes, foxes, even the occasional bear. But this was new. The morning had started like so many others in Timber Ridge, Oregon. The sun broke over the ridgeline, mist still hanging low in the trees. David carried his old canvas backpack, a hat pulled low, and boots broken in from years of use. He wasn't the kind of man who hurried. At 41, never married, no kids, he lived quietly in a cabin his father had left him. He fixed his own meals, repaired his own fence, chopped his own wood. And through it all, Rex was there. The German Shepherd wasn't a trained police dog or military animal. He was just Rex, the pup David had taken in after someone dumped him on the side of the highway years back. But he had instincts David trusted more than most people. That's why when Rex suddenly refused to take another step and stared into the brush, David's gut told him to pay attention. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The crows that usually perched along the power lines hadn't followed him this far. Even the wind seemed to pause. David adjusted the strap on his pack and squinted into the trees. "Your hearing thing," he muttered to himself. "Probably a rabbit." But Rex wouldn't move. His growl deepened, teeth barely showing. Then faintly, David thought he heard it too. A sound, broken, fragile, almost like crying. David's chest tightened. He took a step forward, brushing aside branches heavy with dew. The smell of damp leaves and wet earth filled his nose. He tilted his head, straining to hear again. Nothing. Just when he was about to laugh at himself, Rex bolted. The dog darted off the trail, muscles coiled, weaving through the underbrush like a streak of shadow. "Rex!" David shouted, chasing after him. Branches scratched his arms. Mud sucked at his boots. The forest grew thicker, darker. He cursed under his breath, ducking beneath a low pine limb. "Damn dog, you better not be chasing squirrels." And then suddenly Rex stopped. He stood rigid at the edge of a small clearing, his head turned towards something hidden behind a cluster of maples. His body blocked David's view, but his tail thumped once, low and slow, as if to say, "Here, this is what I found." David's pulse quickened. He stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. "Rex, what is it?" And that's when he saw it. At first it didn't make sense. Just the shape of something pale against the bark of a tree. But then the details sharpened. Rope, wrists tied tight, small shoulders trembling, a cloth jammed into a mouth. A boy, no older than 8 or 9, pressed against the trunk, his wide eyes glistening with tears. David froze. His breath hitched. The boy looked at him like a drowning child spotting the surface for the first time. "Jesus," David whispered. Rex stepped aside, closer to the boy, his nose twitching, ears tilted back in a rare gentleness. The boy whimpered, muffled by the gag, his chest jerking with shallow, panicked breaths. David's mind raced. Who would do this? Why here? And more importantly, was whoever tied him up still nearby? Every instinct screamed turn around, call the sheriff. But another voice, quieter and heavier, whispered, "You can't leave him here." He dropped his pack, pulling out the small folding knife he always carried. "Easy," David said softly, crouching down. His voice was rough from disuse, but he forced calm into it. "I'm not here to hurt you." The boy blinked, tears spilling, his head jerking toward the trail as if terrified someone would return. David steadied his knife, sliding the blade between rope and fabric. "It's gonna be all right." The rope snapped once, twice. Each time the boy flinched, but Rex leaned against his leg, pressing steady warmth into him like reassurance. The gag came out last. The cloth smelled of dirt and sweat. The boy gasped, gulping air as if he'd been underwater. His voice came in a rasp. "Aunt Sarah." David frowned. "What about her?" "She?" The boy choked, shaking his head, words collapsing into sobs. David cut the last knot and the boy slumped forward, too weak to stand. He caught him, lifting him gently, feeling the sharpness of bone under his small frame. "Easy, I've got you." The boy clung to his shirt, trembling. Rex pressed close, circling them both, scanning the tree line. His growl was back, low, warning. Something rustled in the bushes. David's heart slammed. He pulled the boy tighter, his knife still in his other hand. His eyes darted through the forest shadows. And then silence. Only the boy's broken sobs and the faint panting of Rex remained. David knew two things right then. One, this boy wasn't lying. And two, if they didn't move fast, whoever had left him here would come back. He slipped his knife into his pocket, swung his pack over one shoulder, and hoisted the boy into his arms. Rex led the way, ears forward, body low to the ground, every muscle alive with urgency. They didn't stop until David's cabin came into view. Timbers weathered, chimney smoke curling, the old porch creaking under his boots. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, set the boy down on the couch, and knelt in front of him. "Name?" David asked, softer now. "Ethan," the boy whispered. "Ethan." "All right." David grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around his narrow shoulders. Rex jumped onto the rug, sitting directly in front of Ethan like a sentinel. "You're safe here," David said, though even as he spoke, he wasn't sure if it was true. The boy's eyes darted to the window, to the trees beyond, then back to Rex. For the first time, a flicker of relief crossed his face. If this story has pulled you in so far, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals, so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us share more powerful stories like this. Back at the cabin, David poured hot water over a packet of instant oatmeal, setting the steaming bowl on the table. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached for it. He ate slowly, as though afraid it might be taken away. David sat across from him, arms crossed, Rex stretched between them, head on his paws but eyes alert. "Ethan," David said carefully, "tell me what happened." The boy swallowed hard, eyes darting to the floor. She told me it was a game, a treasure hunt." David leaned forward. "Who did?" "My Aunt Sarah," his voice cracked. "She said my dad wanted me to be stronger. She took me into the woods, but his small chest heaved. "She tied me up, said I ruin everything." David felt something inside him harden. He glanced at Rex, whose ears twitched at the tone in Ethan's voice, as if he understood. "Where's your father?" David asked. He doesn't know." Ethan's voice collapsed to a whisper. David exhaled slowly, the weight of it pressing on his chest. This wasn't just neglect. This was something worse. The boy's head drooped, eyes heavy with exhaustion. He leaned into the couch, blanket pulled tight. Within minutes, his breathing steadied into sleep. Rex remained in front of him, gaze fixed on the window, as if daring anyone to approach. David stood pacing the small room, his hands curled into fists. He wasn't a man who looked for trouble. He'd built a life away from noise, away from drama. But the forest had given him no choice. Somewhere out there was a woman who thought she could throw a boy into the shadows and walk away. And now, David thought, staring at the sleeping child and the watchful dog, she'd have to go through him first. The old clock on David's mantle ticked louder than usual. Maybe it was just in his head, but every second felt stretched, pulled thin, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Ethan lay curled up on the couch, the blanket wrapped tight around his small frame. His lips were parted, breathing steady now, his face softened by sleep. He looked younger this way, like a boy who should have been at a ball game or sitting in class, not tied to a tree in the middle of the woods. Rex hadn't moved from his spot on the rug, his ears tilted at every creak in the walls, his body stiff at the sound of the wind pressing against the cabin's windows. His eyes tracked the dark tree line beyond the glass, as though expecting something to emerge. David poured himself a cup of black coffee, sat down at the table, and rubbed the back of his neck. He couldn't ignore what he'd heard, what Ethan had said about his Aunt Sarah. That wasn't just discipline, that was cruelty. He thought about calling the sheriff's office right away, but then he pictured it. Sarah crying on cue, twisting the story, making David look like some crazy loner who had snatched a kid in the woods. It wouldn't be hard. He had no wife, no children, no one to vouch for him, just Rex. And Rex couldn't talk. David tapped his finger against the coffee mug. Not yet. Don't call yet. He needed to understand more. He needed proof. A soft sound pulled his attention. Ethan stirred, half sitting up, his hair sticking in messy tufts. His eyes blinked against the firelight, confusion etched on his face until he spotted Rex. The dog's tail thumped gently against the floor. Ethan exhaled in relief. Hungry again? David asked quietly. Ethan nodded, embarrassed. David warmed up another packet of oatmeal and slid it across the table. Ethan ate slower this time, careful, as if trying not to seem greedy. When he finished, he pushed the bowl toward David with two hands, polite, whispering, "Thank you." David gave a single nod. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure things out." Ethan's eyes darted toward the window. His small shoulders hunched. "She'll come," he said, barely audible. "She always comes." Rex lifted his head, a low growl building in his throat. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen to me. You're safe here. I don't care who she is. You're not going back to that." The boy studied him, as if weighing whether to believe those words. Finally, he whispered, "Okay." And for the first time, there was a flicker of trust in his eyes. Morning came gray and cold. A thin fog rolled off the ridge, swallowing the tops of the trees. David stepped outside with Rex, the door creaking shut behind him. He took a slow walk around the cabin's perimeter, scanning for footprints or tire tracks that didn't belong. Nothing yet, but the forest had a way of hiding things until it was too late. Rex sniffed along the porch steps, tail stiff, then padded back to David's side. His amber eyes seemed to say, "Stay sharp." "Yeah," David muttered, "I know." Inside, Ethan was awake, sitting at the table, tracing the wood grain with his fingertip. He looked small in David's oversized flannel shirt. When David came back in, Ethan asked, "Do you work?" The question caught him off guard. "Work? Yeah, my dad. He's always gone. He says he's working." David pulled a skillet from the rack, cracked a couple of eggs into it. "I used to do construction. These days I take odd jobs, fix roofs, clear trails. Enough to get by." Ethan nodded as though filing away the information. "Do you like it?" David shrugged. "It's quiet. That's enough for me." They ate in silence, the crackle of the fire filling the space. When they finished, David pushed back from the table. "I need to head into town, get some supplies. You'll stay here with Rex." Ethan's face drained of color. "Alone?" "Not alone," David said firmly. "Rex will be right here, and I'll lock the door behind me." Ethan looked at Rex, then back at David, and gave a small, reluctant nod. The road into Timber Ridge was empty, just a strip of cracked asphalt cutting through miles of pine. David drove his beat-up truck with the radio off, his mind grinding through questions he didn't have answers for. At the hardware store, he picked up canned goods, extra blankets, a prepaid phone. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, raised an eyebrow at the armful of supplies, but didn't say anything beyond a polite, "Have a good one." On the way back, David stopped at the corner grocery. That's where he spotted Mrs. Davis, the Stone family's neighbor. She was in her usual gray wool coat, her shopping basket hooked on one arm. For years, she had lived across the street from the Stonehaven's big hillside home. David hesitated, then approached. "Mrs. Davis," he said softly. She turned, startled. "Oh, David, it's been a while." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You've seen things, haven't you? With the boy." Her face tightened, her eyes darting toward the other shoppers. "Don't say his name here." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. On the screen was a picture he'd just taken at the cabin. Ethan wrapped in a blanket, Rex lying at his feet. The boy's cheeks were still pale, but his eyes looked alive. "He's safe," David whispered, "but I need the truth." Mrs. Davis stared at the photo, her hand trembling slightly. I called child welfare once. They came, but nothing changed. Sarah, she threatened me, said I'd regret it if I meddled." David's jaw clenched. "You have to talk to the police." She shook her head. "Not yet. Not until I know he's really out of her reach." David's truck engine growled to life a few minutes later. As he pulled onto the road, his grip tightened on the wheel. He had confirmation now. Sarah's cruelty wasn't just Ethan's story. Others had seen it. But would it be enough? Back at the cabin, Rex greeted him first, bounding to the door, tail wagging once before he returned to his guard position. Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching on a scrap of paper David had left by the fireplace. The drawing was rough but clear enough. A staircase curving sharply, a figure lying at the bottom, and a smaller figure standing frozen at the top. David knelt beside him. "What's this?" Ethan didn't look up. "My mom, she fell." The pencil trembled in his hand. "I heard them arguing, then a thump. Aunt Sarah told me not to look." David's throat tightened. He glanced at Rex, who had settled close, pressing his warm body against Ethan's side. The boy leaned into him, finding strength in the dog's steady presence. "Ethan," David said carefully, "did anyone else see?" The boy shook his head. "They all said it was an accident." David exhaled slowly, the weight of it pressing down like stone. An accident that wasn't an accident. A boy who had carried the secret alone, and a woman who thought she could bury the truth in silence. Not anymore. That night, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. David sat in the chair by the window, shotgun across his lap, Rex curled at his feet. Ethan slept again on the couch, his small hands gripping the blanket even in dreams. Just after midnight, Rex's ears shot up. He growled low, rising to his feet. David leaned forward, finger tightening on the gun. Outside, faint footsteps crunched on frost. Then came the scrape of a hand on the doorknob. David stood silently, heart hammering. Whoever it was jiggled the handle once, twice, then stopped. The sound of retreating steps followed. He waited until the forest swallowed the noise before he let out the breath he'd been holding. Rex's growl faded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the door. David knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he whispered. The message was clear. Sarah wasn't finished. She was close. And the fight to protect Ethan had only just begun. The sun barely cut through the clouds the next morning, leaving Blackwood Forest wrapped in gray. David woke early, though he hadn't slept much. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of wind against the window, had pulled him half awake through the night. He poured stale coffee into a mug, the bitterness stronger than usual, and leaned against the counter. Rex padded to his side, stretching long before planting himself in front of the door. His eyes locked on the trees, ears sharp, body coiled. Even in silence, Rex seemed to say what David already knew. This wasn't over. On the couch, Ethan stirred beneath the blanket. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the dim light. For a moment, he looked like any boy waking up to a Saturday morning, but then his gaze darted toward the window, and the innocence was gone. "Morning," David said, voice low but steady. Ethan sat up slowly. "Did she come back?" David shook his head. "Not last night, but she tried. We heard someone at the door." The boy swallowed hard, his small hands curling into fists in the blanket. "It was her." David crouched down in front of him. "Listen, you're safe here. Rex and we won't let her near you again. But I need you to tell me everything. No leaving pieces out. Understand?" Ethan hesitated, eyes flicking to Rex as if for permission. The dog wagged his tail once, slow, deliberate, then pressed his nose to the boy's knee. "Okay," Ethan whispered. They sat at the table, the fire cracking behind them. David pushed a bowl of cereal across to Ethan, who picked at it between words. "She said it was a treasure hunt," Ethan began, voice thin. "She told me to be quiet, to follow her into the woods. My dad was gone again. He always leaves." His lip quivered. "I thought maybe it was real, that we'd find something." David kept his eyes steady on the boy. "And then she tied me to the tree, said I ruin everything, said she wanted me to disappear." The words hit like cold water. David's jaw tightened. He wanted to march straight into town, slam Sarah's name on every police desk, and demand justice. But he forced himself to stay calm. Accusations were easy to twist. Evidence wasn't. "You did the right thing telling me," David said firmly. "But if we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again, we'll need more than just your word." Ethan nodded, though fear lingered in his eyes. Later that afternoon, David took Rex into town again, leaving Ethan tucked inside the cabin with the windows latched and the shotgun leaning in the corner. At the grocery, he spotted Mrs. Davis near the produce section. She kept her eyes on the apples, but when David approached, she spoke first. "Is he all right?" "He's safe," David answered. "But Sarah's not stopping. Last night she came to my door." Mrs. Davis gripped her cart tighter. "She'll spin it on you. She always knows how." "That's why I need you to speak up," David pressed. "You've seen what she's done." Her voice dropped. "I saw her leave that boy outside in the cold. I saw bruises. But she told me to mind my own business. And when I called child welfare, they showed up once and never came back." David leaned in, lowering his voice. "This time's different. I've got him. I've got proof she tied him in the woods. If you'll back me up, it'll be harder for her to wriggle out." Mrs. Davis looked at him a long moment, then nodded faintly. "When the time comes, not before. Promise me that." "I promise," David said. Back at the cabin, Rex bounded to the door before David had even parked the truck. His bark was sharp, protective. But when David stepped inside, the dog's tail wagged. Ethan rushed forward, relief flooding his face. "I thought you weren't coming back," he admitted, his voice small. "I told you I would," David said, setting down the supplies. He glanced at Rex. "Besides, Rex wouldn't let me stay gone too long." The boy smiled faintly for the first time. He reached down, scratching Rex's ears. "He never leaves." That night, they sat together by the fire. Ethan drew on another scrap of paper, sketching crooked lines that formed the outline of a house. He pointed to the stairway in the picture. "That's where it happened," he whispered. "My mom, she didn't fall. I heard her argue with Aunt Sarah, then a loud sound, then nothing." David leaned forward. "Ethan, are you saying your aunt—" The boy nodded quickly, cutting him off, eyes filling with tears. "She pushed her. I know she did." David rubbed a hand over his face, the truth sinking like a stone in his chest. This was no longer just abuse. This was murder hiding behind polished lies. The next day, David decided to search for more answers. He knew John Stonehaven, the boy's father, was a wealthy man with a reputation for business trips that seemed to never end. But houses kept secrets, and sometimes children knew where they were buried. "Ethan," David said gently, "did your mom keep anything hidden? Letters, papers, anything she didn't want Sarah to find?" The boy thought hard. "She had a box, a metal one. She told me not to touch it. She kept it in the old house before we moved to Stonehaven Villa." David's pulse quickened. "Where's that house now?" "Maple Street," Ethan answered. "It's empty. Nobody lives there anymore." Rex's ears perked as if sensing the weight of the words. That evening, David made his plan. He'd go after dark. Less chance of being seen. He strapped his flashlight to his pack, slid the folding knife into his pocket, and whistled softly. Rex padded to his side instantly. "Stay here with Ethan," David whispered. But the dog didn't move. His amber eyes locked on David's, resolute. David sighed. "Fine, but you stay quiet." Ethan looked up from the couch, worry on his face. "Be careful." "I will," David promised. "And we'll find that box." The old house on Maple Street was a shell of itself. Windows clouded with dust. Porch steps sagging under David's weight. Rex sniffed the air, his tail low, ears forward. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew. Inside, the floor groaned. David moved carefully, his flashlight beam cutting across empty rooms. Wallpaper peeled in strips. Cobwebs draped the corners. It felt like walking into a place frozen in time, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to unlock it. Rex paused at the bottom of the staircase, nose pressed against the third step. He whined softly, pawing at the wood. David crouched, running his hand along the edge. Loose. He tugged gently, and the board shifted, revealing a narrow gap beneath. He reached in and pulled out a tin box, its surface scratched and worn. His hands tightened around it. This had to be it. He set it on the dusty floor, flicked the latch, and opened it. Inside lay a leather-bound diary, stacks of bank records, and a letter written in careful, slanted handwriting. The words jumped off the page. "I'm afraid of Sarah. I must talk to the lawyer. Divorce before it's too late." David's breath caught. The box wasn't just proof of abuse. It was evidence Sarah had motive for something much darker. He packed the box quickly, tucking it into his backpack. Rex's growl cut through the silence a second later. David froze, flashlight beam darting to the back door. The latch rattled once, then stopped. Someone was outside. He killed the light, crouched low, and pressed his back to the wall. Rex stood rigid at his side, teeth bared, a low rumble vibrating through the quiet house. The doorknob jiggled again, faint but deliberate. Then came silence. David held his breath until his chest ached. Finally, after a full minute, the sound of footsteps retreated down the porch. He exhaled, steadying himself. "We're done here," he whispered to Rex. They slipped out through the front, hugging the shadows until the house disappeared behind them. When David returned to the cabin, Ethan was still awake, sitting upright with wide eyes. "Did you find it?" he asked, hope breaking through his fear. David pulled the box from his pack and set it on the table. Ethan reached out, fingertips brushing the worn lid. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to cry. "This was hers," he whispered. "She told me it was important." Rex sat down between them, tail brushing the floor in a slow rhythm. David opened the diary again, flipping through the pages by firelight. Notes about Sarah, withdrawals from accounts, a warning not to co-sign John's loans. It all painted a picture, sharp and ugly. David closed the book with a snap. "We've got enough to start." But even as he said it, he knew this was only the beginning. Sarah wouldn't sit quietly. She had power, money, and lies polished smooth. Yet for the first time, David felt like they had a fighting chance. He looked at Ethan, then at Rex, who yawned wide before settling his head on his paws. "We're in this together now," David said quietly. And in the silence of the cabin, the truth carried more weight than any vow he had ever made. The next 2 days passed under a cloak of unease. David barely left the cabin except to split firewood and bring in water from the pump. He wanted to believe the tin box was enough, that the diary and records could bury Sarah for good. But he knew better. People like her didn't fold at the first shove. They twisted, clawed, and found ways to make the innocent look guilty. Rex sensed it too. The dog hardly left Ethan's side, curling up on the rug near the boy's feet at night, following him outside when he stepped onto the porch for air. His ears never stopped scanning, his body always ready. David found comfort in it, though he hated the reason for it. Ethan was different now, less like the terrified child David had untied from a tree, and more like a boy who was starting to believe he wasn't alone anymore. He even laughed once, just a short burst when Rex dropped a stick onto his lap, tail wagging impatiently. But the sound was real, bright, something David hadn't thought he'd hear so soon. That small victory only hardened his resolve. On the third morning, David drove into Timber Ridge with the tin box tucked under the seat of his truck. The sheriff's department sat in the middle of town, a squat brick building with an American flag waving out front. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A receptionist in a navy sweater looked up from her computer. "I help you?" "I need to talk to someone about a case," David said. "It's urgent." She tapped her keyboard. "Detective Miller's available. I'll let him know you're here." A few minutes later, a tall man in his 50s appeared, his badge clipped to his belt. His eyes narrowed when he saw David. "Miller," he introduced himself. "You're the one from Blackwood Forest, right? Live out by the ridge?" "That's me," David said. "And I've got something you need to see." In Miller's office, David laid the tin box on the desk. He flipped it open, revealing the diary, the letters, the bank slips. Miller's expression shifted from skepticism to focus as he leafed through the pages. "This is Helen Stonehaven's handwriting," Miller muttered. "We still have her signature on file. She filed a complaint about Sarah once, said she was controlling the finances. The case was closed when Helen fell down those stairs." "She didn't fall," David said firmly. "Her son heard the argument. He knows Sarah pushed her." Miller's eyes lifted. "Where's the boy now?" David hesitated. "Safe. You understand I need more than that. If Sarah's involved, we have to move carefully. She's got money, friends on the council, and if she claims you took the boy—" "She already tried," David cut in. "She showed up at my cabin, said I kidnapped him. If it weren't for Rex, she'd have taken him back." Miller leaned back in his chair, studying David. "You're asking me to trust you on a lot here." "I'm asking you to look at the truth," David replied. "This kid doesn't need another adult turning away because Sarah's convincing. He needs someone to fight for him." For a long moment, Miller didn't speak. Then he closed the diary and tapped it once with his finger. "All right, I'll look deeper, but keep the boy hidden. Don't let him out of sight. If Sarah's desperate enough to leave him tied in the woods, she's desperate enough to do worse." When David returned to the cabin, Ethan was sitting on the porch steps. Rex sprawled beside him like a living guardrail. The boy looked up, eyes wide with worry, until David gave him a nod. "You talked to them?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," David said, crouching down. "Detective Miller's on our side. He's going to help." Ethan's shoulders loosened, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "What if she finds us first?" "She won't," David promised. "Not with Rex here." The dog wagged his tail once, as if sealing the vow. But Sarah was faster than either of them expected. That night, while Ethan dozed on the couch, David heard tires crunching over gravel outside. Headlights swept across the cabin wall. "Stay inside," David ordered, grabbing the shotgun from the corner. Rex was already at the door, hackles raised. Through the window, David saw a sleek black SUV. The engine cut off, but the lights stayed on, glaring through the trees. A figure stepped out. Sarah. Her blonde hair gleamed in the beams, her coat tailored, her heels clicking against the gravel, as though she weren't standing in the middle of a dark forest, but on some courthouse steps. "David," she called, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "Bring him out right now. You've gone too far." Ethan bolted upright, panic flooding his face. "Back," David said firmly, motioning him toward the bedroom. "Go." Sarah's voice sliced through the door again. "You're finished. Do you know what they'll call you? A kidnapper. A criminal. Hand him over, and maybe I won't press charges." Rex growled deep, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. David yanked the door open, shotgun cradled in his arms but angled low. You need to leave. Now. Sarah's smile was razor thin. Or what? You'll shoot me? You'll prove everything I've told people about you, that you're unstable, dangerous, a recluse who doesn't belong within 10 miles of a child? David's grip tightened. I'm not the one who left a boy tied to a tree. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, then returned sharper. Prove it. Rex barked once, loud and sudden, and Sarah actually flinched. She recovered quickly, glancing back at the SUV. This isn't over, she hissed. The next time you see me, it'll be with the law on my side. She climbed back into the vehicle, slammed the door, and sped off, gravel spraying behind her. When silence returned, Ethan emerged slowly from the bedroom. She's going to come back. David lowered the shotgun, setting it carefully against the wall. Let her. We're not scared of her anymore. But in truth, he was scared. Not for himself, but for the boy. Sarah's confidence meant she had a plan, one that likely involved twisting the system to her advantage. And if the law bent her way, Ethan could be ripped from safety again. That night, David sat awake long after Ethan fell asleep. He kept the tin box open on the table, the diary splayed across its pages, letters scattered like puzzle pieces. Rex lay at his feet, his eyes glowing faintly in the firelight, unblinking. We'll need more, David muttered. More than this. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound, then lowered it again, sighing heavily. David reached down, scratching behind the dog's ears. You knew from the start, didn't you? You heard him before I did. Maybe you'll hear what we need next. The next morning, David decided it was time to take Ethan to the old house again. There might be more. Pages missing from the diary. Letters Sarah hadn't found. Can we trust Detective Miller? Ethan asked as they packed. We can, David said. But the more we have, the harder it'll be for Sarah to lie. They drove into town first, stopping for gas at the corner station. As David filled the tank, Ethan wandered a few steps toward the vending machine. Rex stuck close, tail wagging, until he suddenly froze. His body stiffened, ears pricking, nose lifted. David noticed immediately. What is it, boy? Rex growled, his eyes fixed on a dark sedan parked across the lot. The windows were tinted, but David swore he saw movement inside. A man's silhouette, watching. He quickly ushered Ethan back into the truck, his pulse hammering. As they pulled out, the sedan stayed put, but David couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been marked. That night, back at the cabin, David laid out the diary again. He traced the torn edge of one page with his finger. Someone had ripped it out clean, like they knew it held something damning. Ethan leaned closer. She said there were papers about Dad, that he owed money, that if Mom didn't sign something, she'd lose everything. David looked at him sharply. Do you remember where she kept them? The boy hesitated, then pointed to the diary. In here, but that page is gone. David clenched his jaw. Then Sarah has it, which means it's the one thing she doesn't want anyone to see. Rex stirred from his spot by the fire, lifting his head. His nose twitched, ears flicking toward the window. David followed his gaze. Out beyond the glass, just past the tree line, a shadow moved. The shadow lingered at the tree line longer than it should have. David's hand hovered over the shotgun leaning by the wall, but he didn't grab it yet. He knew the difference between a hiker cutting through the woods and someone standing with intent. This was no wanderer. Rex's growl vibrated through the cabin floor. His ears were sharp, tail stiff, body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Easy, David whispered, though his own pulse hammered. He killed the lantern on the table, leaving only the orange flicker of the fireplace. The cabin fell into half darkness. Ethan stirred on the couch, blinking awake. What is it, Mum? The boy whispered, voice trembling. David pressed a finger to his lips. Quiet. For a long moment, nothing moved outside. Then finally, the shadow disappeared back into the woods. But the silence it left behind was worse than noise. David stood there for a long while, his jaw locked, until Rex finally lowered his head with a frustrated huff. They're watching us, David muttered. She knows we've got something. The next morning, he decided they couldn't just sit and wait for Sarah to make the next move. He packed the tin box, wrapped it in a canvas bag, and slipped it into his truck. We're going into town, David told Ethan. The boy's eyes widened. But what if she sees us? She probably already has, David admitted. But that's why we're sticking together. Me, you, and Rex. No splitting up. Rex wagged his tail once, sharp and steady, as if agreeing. Detective Miller's office smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. He scanned the documents again, eyes narrowing at the details. "This is enough to raise suspicion," Miller said, "but it's not enough to stick. Sarah has lawyers. She'll claim this is forged, or that Helen was emotional when she wrote it." "She wasn't emotional," David shot back. "She was scared, and now she's dead." Miller rubbed his temples. "I believe you, but in court, belief isn't evidence. I need more. Witnesses. Hard proof." Ethan sat in the chair across the desk, small hands folded tight. His voice came soft but steady. "I heard her. I heard my aunt say Mom had to go. Then I heard the fall." Miller's expression softened. "Kid, I don't doubt you, but we need something that'll hold up under cross-examination." He glanced at David. "Until then, she's free, and she knows you're pushing." David clenched his fists, frustration burning. He wanted to slam his hand on the desk, force Miller to move faster. But deep down, he knew the detective was right. Sarah wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. On the drive back, David noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. A dark sedan, too close, matching every turn. He slowed, it slowed. He sped up, it sped up. "Hang on," he muttered. He turned down a side road that cut through the pines. The sedan followed for a quarter mile before peeling off suddenly, disappearing back toward the main highway. Ethan sat stiff in the passenger seat, clutching Rex's collar in the back seat. "It was them," he whispered. David said nothing, but his knuckles whitened on the wheel. That evening, David sat Ethan down at the table. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees. "We can't stay here much longer," David said. Ethan's eyes widened. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere Sarah doesn't know about. But before that, we need one more piece. Something that ties her down so tight she can't wriggle free." Ethan fidgeted. "There was a letter. Mom wrote it before she died. She told me never to let Sarah see it. I think Sarah tore it out of the diary." David leaned in. "Where would she keep it?" Ethan swallowed. "She has a study, at the villa. A locked drawer." David glanced at Rex, who was lying on the rug but alert as ever. The dog's ears flicked at the word villa, as if even he knew what it meant. Breaking into Sarah's house wasn't the kind of thing David ever thought he'd do, but desperate times didn't ask permission. They waited until dark. The villa sat at the end of a long gated drive, windows glowing soft yellow. It looked more like a mansion than a house, all stone pillars and polished glass. David parked the truck in the woods, 100 yards off the property. He crouched low, whispering, "Stay close." Quiet. Ethan stuck to his side, Rex padding silently like a shadow. The air was cold, their breaths misting in the dark. They slipped through the trees, reaching the back of the property. A light burned in the kitchen, another in the upstairs hallway. But the study window was dark. David tested the latch. Locked. He slid his knife into the frame, easing it open with a faint click. They slipped inside. The study smelled of leather and polish. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books arranged in perfect rows. A desk sat in the center, drawers gleaming brass. David motioned for Ethan to keep watch. Rex stood at the door, ears pricked, every sense alive. David pulled at the drawers. Locked. He searched the desk's surface, finding nothing but pens and a calendar. He cursed under his breath. Then Ethan whispered, "Here!" The boy knelt at the side of the desk, pointing to a panel. It looked ordinary, but his small fingers pressed at the seam, and the wood popped slightly. A hidden compartment. Inside lay a single envelope. David pulled it out, heart hammering. The letter inside was short, but every word was dynamite. "If anything happens to me, Sarah is responsible. She has threatened me. I fear for my life." Before David could fold it back, Rex growled low. Footsteps echoed in the hall. "Hide," David hissed. He shoved the letter into his jacket and pushed Ethan toward the bookshelf. Rex flattened against the desk, silent but ready. The doorknob rattled. Then the door swung open. Sarah stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She flicked on the lamp, scanning the room. Her eyes narrowed at the window left ajar. David held his breath from the shadows, the letter burning like fire in his pocket. Sarah walked to the desk, opened a drawer, and frowned. She reached down to the side panel, the very one Ethan had opened moments before. Her hand hovered over the empty space. Her face hardened. She knew. "David," she whispered into the dark. Her voice was calm, steady, terrifying. "You think you're clever, but you can't hide from me." Rex's growl rolled through the room like thunder. Sarah froze, eyes flicking toward the sound. For a moment, fear cracked through her mask. Then she backed toward the door. "This isn't finished," she hissed and slipped out, heels clicking down the hall. David exhaled, muscles shaking. He grabbed Ethan's hand. "We're leaving, now." They scrambled back through the window, running hard into the woods. Rex led the way, tail streaming behind him, his bark sharp and urgent. Back at the cabin, David slammed the door shut, chest heaving. He pulled the letter from his jacket, laying it flat on the table. "This is it," he whispered. "This is what nails her." Ethan stared at the page, his small face pale but resolute. "She's going to come for us." David looked at him squarely. "Then we'll be ready." Rex settled in front of the door, eyes fixed on the night outside. His body was still tense, but his presence filled the cabin with something Sarah could never take: courage. David placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. She won't win this time." The boy leaned into him, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. Rex's tail thumped once, as if to seal the promise. And outside, the forest stood quiet, waiting for the storm to come. The letter sat on the cabin table like a loaded weapon. Its words were simple, yet each line carried the weight of a verdict. "If anything happens to me, Sarah is responsible." David stared at it under the flickering lamplight, his jaw set. They finally had something more solid than whispers, scars, or half-remembered arguments. This was Helen's voice preserved on paper. Proof Sarah couldn't brush aside with crocodile tears or fancy lawyers. But proof had a way of making people dangerous. Rex must have sensed it. He hadn't left the door since they returned from the villa. His nose twitched constantly, catching scents the human eye would never see. His tail didn't wag. It stayed stiff, signaling he knew a storm was circling. Ethan sat at the table too, the blanket draped over his shoulders. He wasn't crying. He wasn't trembling. He just stared at the letter, his young face locked in an expression too serious for a child. "She'll come for it," he said quietly. David nodded. "Yeah, she will." The next morning, David drove back to Timber Ridge with the letter tucked inside his coat. Ethan and Rex rode with him, the boy in the passenger seat, the dog sprawled across the back seat like a furry shadow. Detective Miller didn't look surprised when David laid the letter on his desk, but his eyes sharpened as he read it. "This," Miller exhaled, tapping the page. "This is different. A written statement, directly naming Sarah as a threat. If handwriting experts confirm it's Helen's, it'll carry weight in court." "She found us in the villa," David said. "She almost caught us with it. She knows we have it now." Miller leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "That makes her more desperate. I'll file for a protective order. But I'll be honest, David, these things take time, and Sarah has friends in places that can stall paperwork. Until we get an official warrant, she's still free." Ethan spoke up, voice trembling but determined. "She won't stop. She said she wanted me gone, like my mom." Miller looked at the boy with the kind of steady gaze that came from decades on the job. "Son, we're not going to let that happen, but you need to stay hidden. Can you do that for me?" Ethan glanced at David, then at Rex, who thumped his tail softly against the floor. He nodded. "I can." On the drive back, David kept checking his mirrors. Every car felt suspicious, every set of headlights too close for comfort. He pulled off the main road, taking the long way through logging trails just to be sure. Ethan hugged Rex in the back seat, whispering something into the dog's ear. David couldn't hear it, but Rex licked the boy's cheek, and Ethan smiled faintly. It was the first moment of peace David had seen on the boy's face in days. That night, the cabin felt smaller than usual, like the walls themselves knew a fight was coming. David built up the fire, checked the locks twice, then sat at the table with the shotgun propped close. Ethan curled up under the blanket again. Rex stretched out beside him. The boy's hand rested on the dog's thick fur, fingers twitching with each dream. But Rex didn't move. His chest rose steady, his ears flicking at every creak. David stayed awake, listening, waiting. It came just after midnight. The crunch of tires on gravel. The glow of headlights sliding between trees. Rex snapped up instantly, a guttural growl tearing from his chest. David grabbed the shotgun, heart hammering. "Get down," he ordered. He motioned Ethan toward the back bedroom. The boy ran, clutching the blanket, Rex at his side until David signaled the dog back. The SUV door slammed outside. A woman's voice cut through the night air. "David," Sarah's tone was sharp, commanding. "This ends tonight. Bring me my nephew and I'll forget you broke into my house." David pressed his back to the door, shotgun ready. You're not taking him. Sarah's laugh was brittle. You think that scrap of paper will save you? You'll go to prison for kidnapping, and the boy will come back where he belongs. He belongs with someone who won't hurt him, David snapped. Silence, then the sound of footsteps circling the cabin. Gravel crunching, leaves rustling. Rex barked fierce and unrelenting. Sarah's voice shifted, closer now, venomous. You can't protect him forever. Minutes dragged like hours. Eventually, the SUV engine roared to life again. Tires spun against gravel, then faded into the distance. David didn't lower the shotgun until the forest was quiet again. His shoulders sagged, exhaustion flooding in. He turned to Rex, who stood rigid, teeth still bared. Good boy, David whispered, resting a hand on his fur. By morning, David knew they couldn't keep living like this. They needed to move. He loaded the truck with essentials: food, blankets, the tin box, and the shotgun. Ethan climbed in with Rex pressed close at his side. Where are we going? The boy asked. Someplace safer, David answered. A friend's cabin, deeper in the ridge. Sarah won't find us there. The drive was long, winding deeper into the mountains. Pines closed in on both sides, the road narrowing until it was little more than dirt and stone. When they finally reached the cabin, it was smaller than David's but sturdy. The porch sagged and the shutters hung crooked. But it would do. Ethan helped unload, carrying small bundles while Rex bounded ahead, exploring every corner. That night, they sat on the porch, watching the sky bleed into orange and purple. Ethan leaned against David's arm. Rex stretched at their feet. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt normal. But peace didn't last. 2 nights later, David woke to the sound of Rex barking frantically outside. He leapt from bed, grabbing the shotgun, and threw the door open. Rex was at the tree line, barking at shadows that slipped between the pines. Flashlight beams flickered in the dark. Voices carried, low, hurried, too far to make out. David raised the shotgun and fired a warning blast into the air. The voices cursed, retreating fast. The flashlights vanished. When silence returned, David knelt beside Rex, heart racing. They found us. Ethan appeared at the doorway, pale, clutching the blanket. Is it her? David pulled him close. Yeah, but she's not getting through us. The next morning, David drove back into town to meet Miller again. He slammed the letter down on the desk. She sent people after us last night. What else do you need to act? Miller's face darkened. That's attempted kidnapping. But without catching them in the act, it's her word against yours. Then set the trap, David said firmly. Use me, use the boy, but end this. Miller studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we'll set the bait. But it has to be careful. If she gets suspicious, she'll disappear, and you'll never see her again. That evening, David returned to the ridge cabin, heavier but steadier. He explained the plan to Ethan as gently as he could. She's going to try again, but this time Miller and his men will be ready. They'll be waiting in the woods, hidden. When she comes, she'll walk straight into it. Ethan's eyes widened with fear. What if it doesn't work? David glanced at Rex, who lay at the boy's feet, ears perked. It'll work. Rex won't let it fail. Rex wagged his tail once, the firelight catching in his amber eyes like a promise. That night, the boy finally slept soundly, his hand resting on Rex's thick coat. David sat awake by the window, shotgun across his lap, watching the tree line. He knew Sarah would come again. And next time, she wouldn't be walking away. The ridge cabin stood quiet beneath a full moon. The wind threaded through the pines, whistling like a warning. Inside, David checked the shotgun again, then placed it by the door. He wasn't reckless. He was ready. Detective Miller's plan replayed in his head. Stay put, keep Ethan close, act normal. Miller's men were scattered through the woods, unseen but listening. They'd hidden cameras along the road and stationed 2 deputies half a mile down the trail. All David had to do was wait. Waiting was the hardest part. Rex felt it too. The dog paced the floor, claws clicking softly against the wood, nose twitching every few seconds. He didn't lie down the way he usually did. He didn't rest. His eyes never left the window. Ethan sat at the table, hugging the blanket tighter than ever. He looked at David, then at Rex, then back to the floor. She'll come tonight. I know it. David crouched in front of him. Good. That's what we want. This time she's walking into a trap. Ethan's lip quivered. What if she hurts you? David shook his head. Not with Rex here. Rex wagged his tail once, slow and certain, as if to second the promise. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Then it came. The low growl from Rex cut through the silence first. His ears shot forward, body rigid. David rose slowly, motioning Ethan toward the bedroom. Go! Stay low! Don't come out until I say. Ethan nodded, clutching the blanket, and disappeared down the hall. Rex stood at the door, teeth bared, his entire body vibrating with anticipation. David peeked through the crack in the curtain. Headlights bounced along the trail. The SUV again, sleek, black, crawling forward like a predator that thought it owned the night. The engine cut off, doors opened, not just one this time, three. Voices carried in the dark. Boots crunched on gravel. Sarah's sharp tone cut through first. Make it quick. He's mine tonight. David's stomach clenched. He whispered, Not tonight, you're not. The front doorknob rattled. Then fists pounded against the wood. David! Sarah's voice was dripping with venom. Bring Ethan out now. End this before it gets worse for you. David's hand hovered over the shotgun. He didn't open the door this time. Instead, he raised his voice. You're done, Sarah. Walk away while you still can. Her laugh was cold, brittle. You really think your word and a mutt will stop me? The law will side with me, not some loner who hides in the woods. Rex barked so loud the walls shook. And that was the cue. From the trees came the snap of branches, the rush of footsteps. Miller's men moved in. Spotlights flared, flooding the clearing in blinding white. Sheriff's Department, a deputy roared. Hands where we can see them. Chaos erupted. Sarah screamed orders at the two men with her, but they froze as rifles trained on them from the darkness. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously, his body pressed against the door, as though daring anyone to try it. David cracked the door open just enough to see Sarah's face contort with fury. You set me up, she shrieked. You think this changes anything? You think they'll believe a dog and a washed-up loner over me? Miller stepped into the light, his badge glinting. They don't have to believe the dog, Sarah. They just have to believe the letter. And the boy. And the neighbor who saw the bruises. You're finished. Sarah's mask finally cracked. Her smile collapsed into something wild, feral. She lunged toward the cabin, but deputies tackled her to the ground before she made it 2 steps. The next hour blurred together. Deputies cuffed Sarah and her hired men, loaded them into separate vehicles, and read them their rights. David stayed on the porch, Ethan clinging to his side, Rex standing guard. When the SUV carrying Sarah disappeared down the trail, Ethan whispered, Is it really over? David looked at him, at the hope trembling in his eyes, and answered carefully, It's the beginning of the end. She's behind bars now, but we've got to make it stick. Ethan nodded slowly. She can't come back? No, David said firmly, not this time. Rex finally relaxed, lying on the porch with a long sigh, as if the weight of days had lifted off his back. The following week was a blur of paperwork and interviews. David brought Ethan to Miller's office more than once, always with Rex by their side. The boy's testimony was hesitant at first, but when he looked at Rex sitting steady in the corner, his voice grew stronger. I heard her push my mom, Ethan told them, eyes fixed on the dog. I heard her say it was my fault, but it wasn't. It was hers. Miller nodded, writing it all down. You're very brave, son. The prosecutors lined up the evidence. Helen's letter, the financial records, Mrs. Davis's testimony, Ethan's words. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed a picture that couldn't be ignored. Sarah's lawyers tried to smear David as a recluse who kidnapped a child for attention. But Miller stood firm. If that man hadn't been in those woods with his dog, the boy would be dead. And everyone knew it was true. Back at the cabin, David noticed a change in Ethan. He smiled more. He slept longer. He even asked to help with chores, stacking wood, filling water buckets, brushing Rex's coat. One evening, while David grilled hamburgers on the porch, Ethan sat in the grass tossing a stick for Rex. The dog bounded after it, tail wagging, barking joyfully. Ethan laughed, really laughed this time, the sound bright and free. David leaned against the porch rail, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, it felt like they weren't just surviving, they were living. But the fight wasn't entirely finished. One afternoon, Miller drove up the ridge in his cruiser. Dust billowed behind his tires. He stepped out, his face grave. She's cutting a deal, Miller said without preamble. Her lawyers are pushing for reduced charges, claiming mental stress, financial pressure. They're hoping to shift the blame onto her brother, Ethan's father. Say he drove her to desperation. David's jaw clenched. So she gets away with murder? Not if we can prove intent, Miller said. He lowered his voice. That missing page from the diary. If we can find it, it's the nail in her coffin. Without it, the jury might give her sympathy. David looked at Rex, who tilted his head, ears flicking. Then we'll find it. That night, as the fire crackled low, Ethan whispered, if they let her out, even for a little, she'll come back for me. David rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. She's not getting out, not while we're breathing. Rex lifted his head, thumped his tail once against the floor, then lay back down. David looked at the boy and the dog, the strange, unlikely family forged in the middle of a nightmare. He wasn't sure what the next days would bring, but he knew this. They weren't facing it alone anymore. The ridge cabin sat in stillness, a kind of fragile calm that came only after a storm. David sat at the table staring at the scattered papers from Helen's diary. The words swam in his vision, but one thought burned clear. There was still one missing page, the piece Sarah had ripped away, the one that could silence every lawyer, every excuse, every spin she tried to put on the truth. Rex stirred from his spot by the fire, ears flicking. Ethan leaned against the dog, his small hand absently twisting through thick fur. The boy had grown more confident in the weeks since Sarah's arrest, but shadows still lingered under his eyes. He hadn't forgotten the tree, the ropes, the fear. David finally pushed back from the table. We're going to end this, he said. Ethan looked up. How? By finding what she doesn't want us to find. 2 days later, David, Ethan, and Rex drove into town to meet Detective Miller. The sheriff's office smelled of paper and stale coffee, but Miller's expression was sharper than ever. We've traced some of Sarah's bank record, he explained, tapping a folder. Looks like she was funneling money through her brother. Helen must have known. That missing page probably ties him into it. If we can prove both siblings worked together, the case isn't just abuse, it's conspiracy and murder. David frowned. Where do we look? Miller's eyes hardened. Her lake house. She kept things there off the books. The place has been sealed since the arrest. But if that page exists, that's where it'll be. The lake house sat an hour out of town, on the edge of Black Pine Lake. It looked like a postcard. White siding, wraparound porch, glass windows staring out over the water. But the air was heavy with secrets. Deputies swept the property first, then waved David, Ethan, and Rex inside. The living room smelled of cedar polish and stale perfume. Ethan clung close to Rex as they searched. David opened drawers, flipped through bookshelves, checked behind frames. Nothing. In the upstairs bedroom, Rex suddenly stiffened. He padded toward the corner of the room, nose pressed to the hardwood. His claws scratched at the floor. What is it, boy? David crouched. He pressed against the board where Rex pawed. Loose. With Miller's help, they pried it up. Dust billowed. Beneath lay a small metal folder, thin but weighty. Inside, carefully folded, was the missing page. David's chest tightened as he read Helen's handwriting. Sarah and John are planning everything together. They've pushed me into corners. If I resist, they will end me. If anything happens, they are to blame. It was the last piece, the smoking gun. Ethan's face paled as he whispered, She knew. She tried to warn everyone. David set the page gently on the desk. And now everyone's going to hear her. The trial came fast. Sarah's lawyers tried every trick, blaming John, claiming Helen was unstable, painting David as a woodsman chasing drama. But evidence doesn't lie. The jury heard Helen's words in her own handwriting. They saw the financial records. They listened to Mrs. Davis describe what she'd witnessed. They heard Ethan's quiet but steady testimony, with Rex sitting just outside the courtroom doors, waiting like a silent protector. The verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts: abuse, conspiracy, murder. Sarah Stonehaven was sentenced to life without parole. Her brother John lost all parental rights. When the gavel struck, Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for years. David's hand rested on his shoulder, steady. Rex wagged his tail once, slow as if he too understood. Life didn't change overnight, but it changed enough. Back at the Ridge cabin, the days grew lighter. Ethan started school again, nervous but braver with Rex at his side each morning. David built him a small desk by the window where he could do homework while Rex slept nearby. Neighbors who once avoided David began stopping by, dropping off casseroles, firewood, even spare clothes for Ethan. The man once called a loner was now the guardian who saved a boy no one else had dared to protect. One Saturday afternoon, David sat on the porch, watching Ethan and Rex chase each other through the grass. The boys' laughter rang across the ridge, free and unbroken. For the first time in a long while, David allowed himself to lean back, close his eyes, and breathe. When Ethan finally flopped onto the porch steps, gasping between laughs, he looked up at David. Do we, do we get to stay here? David smiled, rough but genuine. Yeah, kid, this is home now. For both of us. Rex patted up, dropping a stick onto Ethan's lap, tail wagging. The boy grinned and tossed it again, the dog bounding after it with boundless joy. For David, it wasn't just survival anymore, it was family. Weeks later, Detective Miller visited one last time. He stood on the porch, shaking David's hand firmly. You did good, Marty Miller said. Not just for the boy, for the town. People are paying attention now. More cases are coming to light because of what you stood up to. David nodded, glancing at Ethan, who was sketching Rex in a notebook. He's the one who was brave. I just gave him a place to be safe. Miller smiled faintly. And that's exactly what he needed. As the cruiser disappeared down the ridge road, David turned back to the cabin. Ethan looked up, holding his sketch proudly. It's Rex, he explained, the hero. David chuckled. You're not wrong. Rex barked once as if agreeing. That night, the three of them sat by the fire, the world quiet outside. David watched the flames, thinking of the path that had led them here. An ordinary walk in the woods, a dog that refused to ignore a cry, and a choice that changed everything. He reached down, scratching behind Rex's ears. You found him, he murmured. You saved him before I even knew what was happening. Rex leaned into the touch, amber eyes glowing in the firelight. David looked at Ethan, curled up in the chair with the blanket, eyes heavy with sleep but lips curved in a faint smile. For the first time in his life, David wasn't just a solitary man in the woods. He was something more. A protector, a father in all but name. And he owed it to the dog who had listened when no one else did. And so the story of Timber Ridge ended not with silence, but with voices. Helen's voice carried in court, Ethan's voice carried in school, and David's steady voice promising that, this time, the boy was safe. And through it all, Rex's bark carried loudest of all, the sound that had started everything, the sound that refused to let a child's cry be forgotten. Thank you for following this story until the very end. If you were in David's shoes, would you have trusted Rex's instincts and stepped into the fight, or turned away?